There can be no faith in government if our highest offices are excused from scrutiny. They should be setting the example of transparency. There are a lot of things that Slack gives you that email doesn't when you think about internal use. Switching to Slack from email for internal communication gives you a lot more transparency. The government must give proper weight to both keeping America safe from terrorists and protecting Americans' privacy. But when Americans lack the most basic information about our domestic surveillance programs, they have no way of knowing whether we're getting that balance right. This lack of transparency is a big problem. I've always been in favor of drastic transparency, radical transparency. A good cult delivers on its promises. A good cult nourishes the needs of its members, has transparency and integrity, and creates provisions for challenging its leadership openly. A good cult expands the freedoms and well-being of its members rather than limits them. China has leapfrogged into this information age, and web users have grown very significantly, which knocked down the cost of doing the environmental transparency. The problem with EMA is that it is cost prohibitive for the small investors who were supposed to benefit from the new transparency. I believe in transparency. Accounting does not make corporate earnings or balance sheets more volatile. Accounting just increases the transparency of volatility in earnings. Whatever happens to Bitcoin, other cryptocurrencies are gaining ground and more respect. Ethereum, for instance, has far more transparency. Entrepreneurship transparency, I think, is important because there are so many problems that you just have to be real about them. There are so many ways for a startup to die, so the transparency attitude is key. I've always believed that if you are precise in your thoughts, it's not the lines you say that are important, it's what exists between the lines. What I'm compelled by most is that transparency of thought, what is left unspoken. Abstract ideas like equality and liberty have a spurious transparency, and can be used to derive pleasing theorems in the manner of Jean-Jacques Rousseau or John Rawls. I believe that the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act must be reformed. We must improve the American public's confidence in, and perception of, our national security programs, by increasing transparency, strengthening oversight, and safeguarding civil liberties. We believe that transparency creates trust. It's near impossible to always be right when you're innovating. It's easy to get emotionally invested in it, but you need to monitor its impact like a hawk and react if you don't like what you see. And if, when you pull it back, you want to do that communication with transparency and humility. Inclusion and transparency have been mainstays of my leadership. It's about education and reaching out. Look at the evidence and to be willing to question your own truths, and to be willing to scrutinize things that you hold dearly because that way, that transparency, that self-awareness, will protect you from ever becoming somebody that whose beliefs somehow make them have myopic vision about what could be. Where civil society thrives, governments operate with more transparency and accountability. This creates a tangible impact on the lives of everyday citizens. I believe the processes of good governance have gone astray. Specifically, there is an erosion of transparency, independence, and accountability. Transparency, accountability, and sustainability have become the slogans of the market leaders. Companies carry out environmental and social audits to court the consumer, and even the bluest chips woo organizations such as Greenpeace and Amnesty. Transparency, honesty, kindness, good stewardship, even humor, work in businesses at all times. PR is premised on truth, trust, and transparency. There is no persuasiveness more effectual than the transparency of a single heart, of a sincere life. The new architecture of transparency and lightness comes from Japan and Europe. When I was at the CIA, I asked my civilian advisory board to tackle some tough questions. Among the toughest, in a political culture that every day demands more transparency and more public accountability from every aspect of national life, could American intelligence continue to survive and succeed? That jury is still out. Trump says what he thinks at that moment. He's a totem pole of transparency. I think the currency of leadership is transparency. You've got to be truthful. I don't think you should be vulnerable every day, but there are moments where you've got to share your soul and conscience with people and show them who you are, and not be afraid of it. Transparency in government, no less than transparency in choosing government, remains a vital national interest in a democracy. One man's transparency is another's humiliation. If we want to truly regain the public's trust, we can provide greater accountability and transparency with a simple step. Let's start by communicating to our constituents about the votes we take. Transparency builds trust, and it's critical in a crisis. Britain is the home of economic freedom, with liberty guaranteed by the independence of our state institutions, and an absence of corruption assured by transparency. We talk about this concept of openness and transparency as the high-level ideal that we're moving towards at Facebook. The way that we get there is by empowering people to share and connect. The combination of those two things leads the world to become more open. Anyone who's tuned into the House of Commons TV coverage knows the benches are often empty. I like that. I'm a big fan of political transparency. It's good for us to know which debates the MPs consider important enough to show up for, and which not. Leadership means you communicate. It means you believe in transparency and the rule of law. The keys to brand success are self-definition, transparency, authenticity, and accountability. We are a nation founded on distrust of government power, and questioning that power is essential to promoting transparency and accountability. Science isn't about authority or white coats, it's about following a method. That method is built on core principles: precision and transparency, being clear about your methods, being honest about your results, and drawing a clear line between the results, on the one hand, and your judgment calls about how those results support a hypothesis. We need transparency in government spending. We need to put each government expenditure online so every Floridian can see where their tax money is being spent. A basic tenet of a healthy democracy is open dialogue and transparency. From the RBI side, the fake Indian currency note is an important issue that needed to be addressed. The other collateral benefits from this, in terms of greater accountability, better public finance, more transparency, are, by definition, areas that take time to fully play out. The single most important ingredient in the recipe for success is transparency, because transparency builds trust. Transparency at the MSRB is dubious, with data downloads too costly for all but the vanguards of the world. Transparency is not about restoring trust in institutions. Transparency is the politics of managing mistrust. Our carefully constructed system of checks and balances is being negated by the rise of a fourth branch, an administrative state of sprawling departments and agencies that govern with increasing autonomy and decreasing transparency. The financial crisis is a stark reminder that transparency and disclosure are essential in today's marketplace. Life is filigree work. What is written clearly is not worth much, it's the transparency that counts. Government transparency and efficiency start with a trustworthy team. The fact that millennials are fast at communication and expect transparency and don't feel comfortable with hierarchy gets interpreted as us being impatient or entitled. These traits are perfectly normal given that we're the first digital natives. Visit our website for more quotes, quoting.com.